Welcome to Love and Speak the Truth, a podcast with Sister B and friends. It might get messy, sacred to secular. Don't judge. All voices will be heard here. So listen up. We're going to explore the human experience through the lens of wisdom sharing and faith, with a worldview that might shock you, move you, even downright inspire you. There is something special coming your way in this next episode of Love and Speak the Truth. Not one, not two, but three women whom I call the Trinity. They are women of hope, resilience, and companionship. Sister Jean, currently living and ministering in Chicago, is full of fire to be authentic, with a special mission to fight human trafficking. Sister Johanna hails from Germany, living in Vienna, and passionate and articulate about formation and spirituality. Sister Mary Theresa lives in west of Canada in Saskatchewan. A lifelong artist and advocate for Indigenous people, gives you a glimpse of what religious women are up to these days, having been freed from schools or administration and let loose on the world, making themselves sensationally impactful in what they do and who they are. We're trying something new, and we think you will experience their wisdom in creating, redeeming, and sanctifying love that dwells within. Hello, the Trinity Sisters. It's so good to have you on the show today. I am looking forward to our conversation. I have with me here today Johanna, Mary T, Jean from different places in the world, and I am so interested in where this conversation is going to go today. So welcome, each of you. So let's just begin by just taking a little bit of time to reflect together. Generally, when I start, I ask people to tell me a little bit about their own background, just a little bit about that. But as you contemplate this question, this topic that I'd like to kind of broach today, you can say a little bit about yourself and then get into maybe sharing your thoughts. What what does religious life have to offer the world, do you think?
Hope. I really think we have to offer hope to this life and to the world. Yeah.
So, Johanna, perhaps you can share a little bit about where that is in your context and where you're from.
Well, yes. I live in Vienna, Austria, and I work in the field of spiritual direction, giving retreats, and I also accompany our novices. That means the young women who start to test religious life, whether that is something for them. Um, and I feel hope means for me really to help whoever it is to get in touch with the true and divine core of themselves, that really they can find God within themselves and that they can be the light wherever it is. To light a candle in dark times is better than nothing. So this is somehow how I feel it's also connected really with the deep core of human being.
Yes, I can resonate with that idea of hope because we're looking in this time, we're looking into a great deal of darkness, and religious life historically has offered hope in societies. Yes.
I was thinking from the very beginning of becoming a religious that my call was to walk with people to find their God, regardless of where that took me. And when I look at today's society, as Johanna was saying, that parts of it are very dark. And with, there's so much war and chaos, racism, poverty, homelessness. And we stand almost as a witness to hope and to finding God somehow in our situation. And I once, when I was in university, ran across this proverb. I think it's from 14th century Persian. If you have 2 loaves of bread, sell one, and with the dole buy hyacinth to feed your soul.
Mm. Mm.
So as an artist, I see part of what I do is try to help people find their hyacinths and see the significance of it in their lives, because you can feed your body, but if you don't feed your soul, then you are very poor. And I think as religious, we're familiar with that perspective, and we can encourage others to look for that aspect in their lives. And it's not an easy search, as we were saying, it's in the core of yourself. And often, because we're not crazy about looking at our own vulnerability, we don't want to look there, especially in this era of chaos. So I just think that as religious, we have a place as companions to those around us to help them find that part of themselves
Yeah.
that touches the divine.
We are involved in this whole conversation of religious life today and what we have to offer the world. I think the theme of hope and making a difference in people's lives makes a lot of sense to me. How does that strike you, Jean?
I believe in hope, yes. But the word that I would use is resilience. I think religious congregations have gone through enormous changes in our lifetime. For us, it's Vatican II. But I believe in a world that's in a great deal of change at the present time. We don't know what the future is. Obviously, we expect that to be. But life is changing around us, mainly because of science. We have artificial intelligence now, and I believe all the entities that brings with it is changing our world. I think one of the other things I believe that's happening is as we change scientifically as a people, we have to change scientifically as women religious. And that's going to make a different impact because it's also affecting the church. And the church is in a different place than what's happening in our world sometimes. And so there's always this conflict. So I have hope that we can stay attuned to the reality of the world in which we're going to live, which is a technological world, such as we're in today. We are a global world. We see things instantly. We know what's happening around the world. But I guess my vision is that in some ways we will be not just looking and talking at a picture, but we will be interconnected, as a people. And that religious life, as it moves into the future, is going to take a different twist as well.
How do you resonate with that, Johanna? In Vienna, where you are, do you have that
Yeah.
same worldview?
It was interesting. When I listened to you, Jean, when you said something about our world is changing, and then you moved to a kind of technical change. And actually, my first thought was, yes, there's war again. I live here in the east of Austria. There are probably 400 kilometers between me and Ukraine. And just now, in the last weeks, the governments have passed around advices how to prepare for 1 week without energy, for a blackout or even worse situation. And I would never have thought, really never, that I would live in a time when we think or are afraid of a kind of whatever breakdown situation. I don't want to imagine the worst now. And so many people around me are afraid. And there is also, again, the field where I think we have to offer something. We have to offer somehow hope in the way of whatever happens, it's not the last. There is still a kind of value to show human dignity or whatever. So somehow to light the candle for the core values at the moment, and that's not only on a spiritual level, also really to do it very practically, to make sure that people have access to information, whatever, that we support each other. But I myself wouldn't, I'm now 55. I thought, okay, I live in a very privileged situation, but it has come so close, and it's getting so real also in our social media, where I think that people don't despair, and that they are not too afraid of what might come, and simply to stand by them in this situation now.
I connect to that in the sense that we're a world at war, sometimes with ourselves. Jean spoke about changes in the church. You shared about the proximity of war in your own lifetime, in your own area where you live, your own country. What does religious life have to offer in these contexts when actual violence is knocking on doors of our lives? Yeah. Why would people consider being a part of this centuries-long tradition? What makes us make sense? Jean, you have thought?
We are gospel women. We are gospel living. We should be living out the gospel message. And I wonder if it's the idea of creating a new consciousness for us. We have to be a new consciousness for people. And I think that's through the gospel. How do we be gospel women if transformation is moving towards transformation? I use the Middle East a lot when I talk because that's the closest to the major wars I feel, as well as Korea, and the possibility of what might happen in the United States. We never know. But I believe that the message is clear for us as people who are professed religious in the church. The main message is the gospel. How do we live every day in relationship to the rest of the world? Fantastic things are happening over there, where you say, Johanna, I believe of our women in Eastern Europe, of how they're caring for what's happened to the others. But it's just, I don't know how else to put it. Jesus is our model, and unless the let's say professed religious organizations in the church, whatever church they belong to, believe that the same thing that we do, that there's not going to be a change. There's not going to be a transformation of people to change the words, to change attitudes, to change behaviors. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand. I want to hear Mary T.
Well, it was interesting when Jean began to talk about the technical and AI transformation that is occurring. I was picturing myself walking out of my building, and I am surrounded by Indigenous people. 90% of them are homeless, looking for food, looking for shelter, especially in minus 30 temperatures. And I ask myself, how can I, as a religious, relate to this? How can I be present? And one of the ways is by, as you referred to, the significant power of Jesus and the witness that we can have, giving compassion, no judgment, standing up if there's racial issues, which happens every day. I just think that, especially since as religious, we didn't get a good rap in the last century in terms of our treatment of Indigenous people. And so it's imperative for us to be present to them in whatever way we can.
I'm hearing you, sisters, challenging us, right? Challenging us, the listeners, to contemplate where they fit in this conversation of where we belong as religious women. Let me just say from my point of view, when I think of that question, what I had in mind, I said, what's my answer to that? And my answer to that is a way out of poverty. And I would like to hear what you think about that. And I'm going to explain to you why I say religious life today can offer the world a way out of poverty. When women, young, middle-aged, whenever they come to us, there is a sign that well, we take the vow of poverty, right? Which I think is not good language for me, but that's another story. But a way out of poverty, the mind, body, spirit poverty, takes us in a way to say, we're in this together. As religious women, we're in this together. We don't really do anything on our own. And some people might see that as a negative. But what we do in our finding our purpose as when we enter the religious congregation and find the gift that we bring, we somehow get a strength in numbers that wherever we are, we're backed by and we're strengthened by the gift of community, the gift of values and focus that say we all get trained, we all get what we need in order to do the work of the Gospels. Maria Beer, who's one of my big mentors, spoke about in a poem she wrote that we can become water walkers. You remember when Jesus invited Peter out of the boat? We have to get out of the boat.
Right.
Stop being afraid, Our poverty of spirit that makes us afraid to stand up for these gospel values. So I don't know, maybe you don't agree, but I think what we have to offer is a way out of this poverty of standing alone, being afraid, unable to use our own gifts.
Yeah, for me, it brings together somehow. Minutes ago, there was this word resilience, and I thought of empowerment. I really think also that we religious as women, especially as women, can somehow be sometimes a role model, not as, okay, I know how it is, but simply to show them it's possible, and to empower other women or whatever marginalized, to see it's possible when you get in contact with your own strengths, with your own gifts. um, and there I feel many people look at us when we invite them. For instance, here in Vienna, we sometimes invite people for Bible sharing or for Mass, and they feel at home, or it's a 2 hours of enjoying our company. And I don't know what it is, but I feel that they get in contact with themselves. And I think it's not a coincidence that it happens when we are sharing the gospel or sharing also food afterwards. It's this kind of companionship, and it gives them the feeling of being part of something.
Getting in contact with ourselves, that struck a chord for me, to become in contact with the person that you're called to be. We have a context for that in our religious life. We have a context for it because in that formation, hopefully, what people come out with is a sense of purpose. What is my baptism, my commitment inviting me to? It's not about acquiring and possessing, whether it be things or people. It's about feeling a sense of purpose. And that purpose we find in the gospel and we find in our traditions, but that feeling something more than ordinary. Where did we hear that before?
Mary Ward.
Mary Ward.
Mary Ward.
Yeah, something more than ordinary.
Brenda, to go back to something you said, and I think for us, I can't speak for any other part of the world, but I know it's a somewhat different religious life. But I think our vows are a contradiction to what we say. And that's conflict for a lot of people who know us. We live in houses that are superior to what they can live in or afford. We have clothing, we go places, restaurants. I mean, just that it's a contradiction to me, at least. The other reality is that it's very difficult I remember working in Inglewood at one time, and we had a lovely home in the rectory the priest gave us, but it was a contradiction to the people around there who didn't have running water sometimes or electricity, that we were working with them. And that makes a difference. It's hard to sit down. I worked on the Ignition Spirituality Project, working with homeless women on retreats. And that was a wonderful experience. And I enjoy them, and they enjoyed me, I think, because we could laugh and sing and dance together. But then we went home to where we were. They went home to shelters, and I went home to a nice place to live. There's the poor, I'm talking about the financially poor, because I remember in the 90s when we changed leadership, and in the North American province, they changed the leadership of the province at that time, changed the word poor, which was created by our committee to be anything or anyone. Oh, that person's poor because they don't have, whatever. And we were really talking about the financial, the everyday living where people don't have food on their plates. They don't have gas to get to their jobs. They don't have cars and what we have today. The immigrants are here. So I think that there's a way to set up, but I agree with what you're saying. You don't do it alone. We have to do these things within the context of others, whether it's our own community or with a lay group. I think that makes a difference when we're doing it together. We're helping one another naturally as a community or whomever we are working with, but we're also assisting those who are in need.
Yeah, I think Mary T can maybe speak from your perspective. You talked about the indigenous people.
Well, I think it's imperative to, as we stand really in our own poverty when we engage with the indigenous people, because we know what we don't have, and somehow it's a challenge to create community with them, but it is possible, like I one of our sisters was out here, Carmen, and Shelley and Carmen and I went out to a sacred spot called Wanaskewin. And I was very conscious of being a guest there and the feeling that we were welcome. But we were, we were the guests in their community. This man talked for an hour about making drums. And I said, Mary T, you have to listen. I wanted to ask all kinds of questions, but I said, that's not my role, but to be present and to be witness to that sense of, we are with you. We are with you. And I had a lovely experience too last year. There was a treaty workshop offered at our retreat house. And I went, and it was education on, like we live in Treaty 6. And, we have to be aware that we're treaty people also. And the teacher was a smiling grade 4 student I had taught about 30 years ago. And I became her student. And I think that was very valuable for the whole community to see. And her mother, who was the elder, referred to that experience, that now sister has become the student. And I think that's just where we belong in this, learning from, without, as I said, without judgment, and not assuming that we know what they need.
That's right.
Listening is very important.
That really resonates also within roughly 20 years ago, I had a kind of, we call it poverty experiment. That means I lived for 1 month with homeless people. Really, they shared their place with me. And after that, I always felt financial poverty is something which should not be. But when people like this live together, they showed me that they have a very direct access to life. There is nothing around it. And when they allow me to share in their life, they share even a charism. There was something direct. There was something without I can't really describe it, but I felt I'm really getting in touch with them. And sometimes when my novices, I always have now our novices, I have to see where they can have this kind of experience. And always when they live with some kind of marginalized people, they come back with the same experience. So when you, Brenda, said something about what have we to offer, listening to all this, I thought, well, we can really learn from people who have lived or who live through this kind of sometimes crisis, or I don't know. I think they have also to offer something to the world. In the way that we can learn something, what it is really to get in touch with life, to connect with people without any ways around it. And I think to find the way between, not to say poverty is nothing good. Really, people have to get out of it. But nevertheless, there is something in it which has a value. And I think that would be a chance for us also to get in touch with this kind of with a charism of it, because to live the vows means it brings us closer to Jesus, to God, and hopefully to the people. Find the way in between. I think it's a very thin line, and it's very difficult not to glorify it, because I think there is nothing to glorify about financial poverty or loneliness or homelessness or something like that. But there is a reason why Jesus praised the poor.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
And
That's
we
right.
and we can take a look at how we use that word, because there's something in that word of poverty that gives us that the negative. It says to go without. We hear that to live in poverty is something that makes us poor in spirit and in hope and in all of that. At the same time, religious life has a structure of community life, not a place where people live together, but a sense of inclusion, a sense of practicing living according to our need. And so I think when people look at us, and they may see us as living, as Jean said, comfortable lifestyle in nice houses, but it's not about that. You can be poor and you can be living a very affluent lifestyle and have no sense of purpose. You could be living in hopelessness. So how you define that? But I think the way we sort of endear this sense that everyone can be included, is something that the world needs. It's the indigenous people, the enslaved people, the immigrant people, the trafficked people. How do we somehow find a way to help people to feel included in ourselves? I'm talking to four, including myself, very privileged people. Do we even have access to understanding what it means to be on the outside?
I'll just take a stab at it, but it's difficult to answer that question, to be honest.
Yes.
I remember when I was in El Salvador, I was there a few times just visiting. And this one time was at the very beginning, and when there was no electricity, there was no water, there was very little, and most of the men were still at war or had been killed. And one of the things that this one night, they were going to have a dance, and that was just fantastic for them, out on the dirt with a truck pulled up with lights on and a boombox that had batteries. And the ages that were there were like 3 years old to, maybe 40 would be the eldest. I remember dancing, and they were all dancing with one another, little kids, the babies, and whatever. It was a wonderful experience. But I remember I stepped back that night, and for some reason, I just looked up at the sky, and the sky was dotted. It was brilliant with stars, and it was shining some type of a light on us. But what got me is they have nothing except their dependence upon God. And I have so much clutter in my life, sometimes I cannot find God. But it was that night that it was a new experience of God for me. It wasn't just God in a church or God and a prayer, but it was God and the people and how they treated one another.
Mm.
And that experience was just beyond the beyond for me. Who is God? Who was God for all of us? They were totally dependent upon God. The poor are dependent upon. They're the only ones sometimes that they feel listens to them. We just have, sometimes take God for granted since then, and that was some time ago now. Even working with the people in the city, the homeless, the shelters, and that, there's always seems to be a sense of God someplace, providing they're not on drugs or, all that other stuff that happens to them today. But there's this sense deep within, there's a God that's walking at times. They know a God is there.
Yeah, thinking of that and all our conversation now, I end up with two images. I thought, well, how to include, I think, really to refer to the dignity of the people when we have an encounter, really to refer to them. Also as a novice, I worked for 9 months as a chaplain in a prison. And very soon I realized it doesn't matter who I am, but it matters whether I shake hands with them or not,
Right.
Yes.
because
Yes.
usually it would not be done by those who work there. And somehow sharing some time with the homeless, I had a very profound experience of I didn't feel so well, and then there was a moment when I was rather in despair because it was not easy to live with 14 homeless men in one place, very very tight. And there was one moment when I suddenly had this "I am the I am" in my mind, and I realized, okay, I can only be present because so to face my powerlessness, I could not help, I couldn't do anything. But then to realize, but to be present, as Mary T was mentioning before, simply to be there, and they appreciate it. They said, well, it's good that you are here, that you are present for us, with us. And it really, I had this feeling of, okay, I am the I am. And so it was both that I am somehow connecting with the one in the thorn bush, but on the other hand, they are also the burning thorn bush. And I felt this is real encounter when we meet each other in the other's person or other's eyes. And that is for me, well, this is really a time of grace when I can get in touch with this. But somehow to share this with people in the way, yeah, it can happen everywhere. And with any person I meet, very often I forget about it, of course. But sometimes there are these little moments when I realize now is the time to remember and somehow to live it and to refer to the dignity of the people.
That connection is always present. I love to hear this example of I am. And I see that in some of the writings, such Thich Nhat Hanh's I am one drop in the ocean, and I am the ocean. God is with us. God is with us because we are the presence of God. We're the divine spark that enables the life of God to thrive between us, human beings, and all creation. I don't separate, God in someplace else and God outside of myself, and that takes practice. We heard a talk earlier this week from Sister Diane Burgant, and she talked about that God isn't a plan, or God doesn't have a plan, that God is a God of possibilities, that we ourselves see ourselves as poor, and we walk with the poor, and we are the poor, and we recognize the poor in ourselves and in each other. So this is all coming together for me as the great I am. I am. Yes, I am a part of creation, and I am creation. I'm co-creating the gift of God in the world. Mary T, you had a comment.
I was, often aware that we're not aware of our perspectives of how we look at things. We we go on and just think them. And there's a very short answer to this. There is no other. There is no
Yeah.
other.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to think, even though we might not articulate it, but we're still up here thinking, but there is no other, whether it's with people or creation. That is humbling. That is part of the poverty of the universe. That's who we are. We're all
One.
together. Yeah,
One.
we're all one. There is no other.
Sort of selfishly, I move over to this transition that we are making, IBVMs and CJs. And we still use the two names because legally, that's what we are, two different groups. There is no other. What does that mean in this whole process that we're in? How does that look? How does that sound? How does that feel as we look at this merger of becoming one with another?
Can I tell you a little story about that? A friend of mine, he lost his wife, who was one of my closest friends, in September, and he ran across Gemma, is her name Simons?
Simmons.
And she was talking about the Ignatian way of prayer. And he wrote an email to me and he said, Mary T, that's you. You're all over that. That's exactly who you are, And I thought, yes. I mean, we might express it slightly differently. But, I've lived my life and he's known me for 45 years. And he could spot it, which means we are. There is no other. He understood that. That's who we are.
I understand it too.
But he rather surprised me, because you don't expect people to see that right off the bat. And he did. So it's a great compliment to our spiritual fathers and mothers.
Becoming one is so very important to me because I think that's one of the things we can model for the world, for nations and people who are trying to separate us and look for differences in us and look for the ways that we are unlike each other and say, you stay in your part of the world and stay in our part of the world.
Right.
And I think this whole process of coming back to our belonging is a helpful symbol to people have this image that we're better on our own. I think we're better together. We're better, more visible, more inspired by the Word of God because we see similarities that we value and we see differences that we value and we say that's okay, So for me, it's a real model for a global society celebrating that the gift of being global and international.
I agree with what you're saying, Brenda. For me, one of the things is, you've had the gift of meeting people from all over the world as IBVMs and CJs. And I have had some of that experience in my life. And I've loved each time that I met up with new people, IBVMs, because I began to learn about their culture, their understanding of life and that. And I also remember that when we had a meeting, when we were becoming one with the IBVMs, the Irish group, we had a prayer that we used, and it was adapted from a book called Darwin Prayed. I would just like to read it to you. Could I? It's a small poem.
Sure.
And it just says, I think, what we're about in some ways. It's called Riding Wilderness Winds.
Mm.
And it says, O blessed one and blessed oneness, the IBVMs of the U.S. province long to find for ourselves the eagle's grace to ride effortlessly the thermals of life. Be the wind under our wings as we leave the nest of the familiar. Grant us the vision of your dream for us. Help us to engage ourselves in love, with love, through love, to be Christ anew.
Mm.
In this season of change, we journey spirit-led into the wilderness of our apprehension, to face our demons of distrust, to find the courage to lean once more into the winds of grace, to be uplifted by your mistral presence. Set us down gently, O Blessed One, in a new place of infinite possibilities.
Mm. Mm.
And that's the oneness. It's the infinite possibilities.
Yeah.
To me, it's what we don't know, we don't understand. And what we're going to learn maybe is more than we can understand in our lifetime,
Right.
because the other part of the world and parts of the world have done so much that we've never experienced. And it's gift to us. I remember in 1994 when I was at the CJ chapter in Ascot, where we spent 5 weeks, and Cecilia was a representative from the Irish General Aid. And I remember coming back and saying, they're no different than us. And everybody just looked at me. I said, no, they're the same as us. And I think there's the same challenges there. Maybe we use different words. We're all at different places. We're never going to be on the same level. And I don't mean level that way, higher or lower, but I mean, we have different experience just normally. So we are different from one another. And we have to look at that and respect it and find out more about it. Exploring, being
Yeah.
open to it.
Yes, it's going back to that what we were talking about before of there is no other,
Right.
no other. And I think we could read that that poem to the immigrant. We can read that poem to the person at war.
Right.
It's all set up, girded up
Yeah.
by fear, the fear of other. And if we could find a way to make that other less threatening, I think that's a gift.
But it's knowing them that makes us less threatening. So
Yeah.
we have to make sure we're open to them. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? The other
No
is, and I'm
No.
not talking about Earth, I'm talking about people. Once we meet someone, we might look at them and say, oh, I don't, you know what? But then we start talking, and some of our stories are very shared. Our experiences of hurt and pain and love and joy, we're all the same in some ways.
Yeah, I relate to our experiences because Brenda, you also shared the experience a few weeks ago in Loyola, where many of us met from the two branches, and it was from the first or second day, and I think I mentioned it even. It was this experience of we don't know each other, but we are not strangers.
Right.
And this is somehow really reassuring to realize, well, both branches had now this decision. We want to get together. And now the taste of it is already that was right. I can see it's not an easy process, but I think it's nevertheless the experience. Yeah, but two things which belong together are now getting closer to each other. So
Right.
somehow it's now the feeling, yeah, it has to happen, and now is the time. And I also had the feeling when I met so many women with a very powerful spirit and personality and deeply connected with God. I really felt to get in touch with Mary Ward. She mentioned in her 3 speeches something like women in time will do great things.
Right.
So somehow I really feel, yeah, when you look at us, you might think, well, are they religious? But when you really get in touch with so many of them, you feel how deeply all of us, I would say, are connected with God, and it's an easy way to get in touch, and that is for me a sign of, okay, we are really connected already from the roots, and not just from now getting to know each other. And that's for me also a sign of hope, that it is really something which is now is the time for that.
Perfect. Listen, this conversation we're having could go on for a little while longer, and maybe we'll have to have a part 2. But I think at this moment, what I'd like to do is transition a little bit into your What do you feel your one truth is? If you could say it in a short sentence, an example, a metaphor that strikes you as something that is important as you go through life at this stage in your life. What is your one truth? Because this podcast is called Love and Speak the Truth. Perhaps you have one thing you'd like to leave the listeners with.
Well, when I was in university, saw the movie Monsieur Vincent, and it's about St. Vincent de Paul. And he was giving his instruction to the sisters who were helping him going out to deal with the poor. And he said, love the poor and they will forgive you for giving them bread. That has been what I have lived by. Whether it's love your students and they'll forgive you for trying to teach them, or love your friend and they will forgive you for challenging them. That has worked since that time for me.
Please repeat that, Mary T. Say that quote one more time from the author.
Love the poor and they will forgive you for giving them bread. And it's St. Vincent de Paul.
Thank you.
Actually, I also live from a quotation, but it is not that short.
Okay.
And I refer to Ignatius, and I had now to look up for a translation because I'm not sure whether I could just translate it. But it is this very famous saying of an invitation to somehow to surrender to God's grace. And the translation I found is this: there are very few people who realize what God would make of them if they abandon themselves into his hands and let themselves be formed by his grace.
Mhm.
And actually, it is very deeply connected with my call. It was this decision, okay, I step out of my life and I just try. And whenever I feel, okay, I'm not sure whether this works, I'm somehow reminded of that. And I think, okay, it's again a time to believe or to trust that God has possibilities with me. And actually also to see for others, God has possibilities where I would not see them. But it needs that somehow I commit myself or give up or surrender. And I don't mean that I give up my possibilities in the way of, okay, I just give in. I don't mean that. But simply to realize, okay, there is grace in my life. And when I really entrust it, and I feel it, he has made things out of me I would never have thought it might happen. I can see it now. Since I joined 20 years ago, I feel, yes, I wouldn't have imagined that this happens. I wouldn't have imagined that I see places, that I have a work like this, that things like this happen in my life. So somehow there is really a truth in it, even though the quotation is quite long. The essence of it is really always helping me through a crisis.
And for me, I would just say that change is the only constant in life, and God permeates those changes. Change is the only constant in life, is the ongoing constant in life, and that God permeates all the changes with me at every step.
Well, I want to just thank you three women who gave up some of your time to come into the conversation. And for me, it was enlightening to hear some of your perspective on our remaining relevance as religious women. That was my hope. We would got into specifics on that, and I'm very grateful for your time. So, Johanna, Mary T, Jean, God bless you all, and I thank you so much for being on Love and Speak the Truth. And now for the wrap-up. You have just had a human experience from a spiritual being. We have so much to learn. So go forth to love and speak the truth. Ad majorem Dei Gloria.